Hi, and welcome to another episode of Joy Recovery Radio. Today, we are going to continue part 2 of our look into the Minwalla model. I encourage you to check out part 1 before you listen to part 2. In part 1, just for a brief summary, we looked at how our deceptive sexuality actually had 2 components to it. There's one problem that had 2 parts. The first part is what Dr. Minwalla calls compulsive entitled sexuality. And the second part is integrity abuse disorder. And when you take those 2 parts, it leads to an even bigger problem, and that is deceptive sexuality trauma. And this is a unique form of trauma that impacts, number 1, the perpetrator, number 2, the partner, the true victim, and additionally, anyone who's living in the family unit or in the household as well. And so that was a brief overview of the model. Today, what we're going to look at is what Dr. Minwalla calls deceptive compartmentalized sexual relational reality, DCSR. The analogy of the secret sexual basement that kind of helps us frame that and understand that. And then what is the unique form of trauma that the victim ends up experiencing as a result of our deceptive sexuality? And we're going to conclude with what are the next steps after looking at the Minwalla model that the victim should consider doing, and what are the next steps that the betrayer should consider doing. Let's begin with DCSR, deceptive compartmentalized sexual relational reality. When we look historically, there's many people who had these secret sexual basements, whether it was Martin Luther King Jr., despite all the good that he did, there was still a secret sexual basement there, or whether it's Gandhi and all the great movements that he had, there was still a secret sexual basement there. When we take each of the 4 components and break it down one at a time, this is what it looks like. The first is deceptive. It's deceptive because the partner is not aware of it and doesn't have any say, vote, or voice in the matter. This was not negotiated. It's deceptive. It's hidden. It's secretive. And by its very nature, if there is deception going on, that's where abuse starts. Abuse shows up when deception begins. And when you consider your own secret sexual basement, it doesn't matter what the square footage was. It doesn't matter how often or how infrequently you would go down there. It doesn't matter who was down there. It doesn't matter what was down there. It doesn't matter what the behaviors were in your basement. It doesn't matter if it was sexual in nature, or if it was relational, or if it was emotional, or if it was, quote, just pornography, or it was only online. If it is deceptive, then it is by nature abusive. It has done incredible harm to the partner. The next component in this is compartmentalized. And what that simply means is that not only is it secret from our partner and from others, but it is separate in nature. We are living a disintegrated life. It's the opposite of integrity. Integrity means we're living an integrated life. There's not these compartments. There's not these secret areas of our life. When we live a compartmentalized life, it's as if we go to a closet that represents our life, and we've got all these boxes. And we've got this box for our sexuality, and we've got this box for our career, and we've got this box for our marriage, and we've got this box for our children, and box for hobbies, and box for holidays. And it doesn't make sense to others. How could he go and spend time with family and take down that Christmas holiday box and conduct that holiday and be with family members and such, and then put that box up and bring the sexuality box out and engage in those behaviors, put it back, and then go right back to family or career, or all these compartments to his life? That is a disintegrated life. That is a lack of integrity, a lack of integration. And that is living a compartmentalized life. I've seen in my own life how there is deceptive, compartmentalized behaviors that are not sexual. A person can have deceptive, compartmentalized eating realities. A person can have deceptive, compartmentalized financial realities. A person can have deceptive, compartmentalized business realities. I had a friend that I was very close to that secretly was smoking, and this was a roommate of mine. And I kept seeing evidence that they were smoking, and I kept inquiring about it and talking to them about it. And if you look at the integrity abuse behaviors, the gaslighting, the blame shifting, the avoiding, almost every single one of them, this roommate utilized those to try and hide this secret smoking basement that they had. So when it comes to these behaviors, we see these behaviors anytime we're living some kind of deceptive, compartmentalized life. These behaviors are what we use to try and protect that particular basement. So it could be a financial basement, it could be a business basement, it could be a food basement, it can be a smoking basement. What we're talking about here, though, is a sexual basement. So it's deceptive, it's compartmentalized, and its third component, sexual. Now, it could be sexual or it could be relational. So it could be something that involves sexual behaviors, or it could be relational, where there is romantic behaviors or there is emotional affairs going on that may not be sexual in nature. This is still an act of betrayal. This is still deceptive. This is still secretive. Therefore, it's compartmentalized. This is still abusive and damaging and harmful to the partner because they weren't able to negotiate. They weren't privy to this. They did not know that this basement had been built right below their feet. And so it could be sexual in nature. It could be relational in nature. It could be romantic. It could be emotional. It could be intimate, but there's no physical component. There's no sexuality. It could be online only. It could be pornography and using your sexuality in that way. It could be flirting with others and being deceptive and unfaithful that way. But it's either sexual or it's relational in nature. And then the final component in DCSR is that it's a reality. And what Dr. Minwalla means by that is that we need to realize that there's a lot more in the basement besides just some kind of sexual behavior. It is an entire space that is filled with a whole reality, a parallel reality that is unknown to others. When we talk about a secret basement, we're not simply referring to any sexual or relational behaviors or acts that are going on in that realm. A secret basement may also include interactions, conversations with other people, activities such as going places, eating meals, spending money, traveling, and so on. It's living a, quote, double life and being in this somewhat separate, sexualized, alternative universe. It is a separate reality. And so when you put those four together, you have what we call the secret sexual basement. Deceptive, compartmentalized, it's sexual or relational in nature, and it's an alternate reality. Now, if you look at the show notes, you'll see a link to Dr. Minwalla's website where he has a white paper that he's written that talks about the 10 steps, the process that a person goes through when they construct the secret sexual basement. And I highly recommend that you read that. Now, when it comes to the secret sexual basement, I want to share a point that I'm going to, for the sake of emphasis, actually share this twice because it's so important. The secret sexual basement will cost you more than you want to spend. It will keep you there longer than you want to stay. It will take you further than you want to go. And it will cause more destruction than you ever thought possible. Let me say that again. The secret sexual basement will cost you more than you want to spend, keep you there longer than you want to stay, take you further than you want to go, and cause more destruction than you ever thought possible. The result of the compulsive entitled sexuality and the secret sexual basement is that it causes a unique form of trauma for those that are above the basement, especially for the partner. And that in Minwalla's model is called deceptive sexuality trauma. It's a specific type of abuse that the perpetrator does to the victim that causes a specific type of trauma. And the best way to try and understand the unique nature of this trauma is to better understand two other forms of trauma that are closely related. And when we have a basic knowledge of these two types of trauma, it helps us understand some of the nuances and layers of deceptive sexuality trauma. So the first form of trauma that we want to look at is PTSD. And this is one that we're most familiar with in our culture. PTSD is when there is typically a single event that results in problematic long-term symptoms for the victim. Oftentimes when we think of PTSD, we think of veterans. They experienced a single event during battle that etched itself onto their psyche, and they have long-term symptoms and problems as a result of that post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of the symptoms that they may experience is extreme stress, and betrayed partners go through this. They could potentially be worrying about, do I have a disease as a result of my partner acting out? Am I safe right now? Is there going to be an upset mistress that's going to show up someday? Are my children safe? There can also be intrusive re-experiencing of D-Day. There can be frequent triggers and reactivity that lead to hypervigilance for the victim. There can be persistent avoidance where they begin to avoid any kind of interaction and they begin to isolate socially from friends and family and former hobbies and activities that they used to enjoy. It can lead to constriction and avoidance. The victim of PTSD, including betrayed partners, after D-Day will often experience negative changes in both their thoughts and their mood. They can experience significant shame as a result of what's been done and a profound level of embarrassment. There is obviously an intense relational rupture that takes place, and there is a serious injury to the attachment that they thought they had with their partner. So these type of acute PTSD symptoms often occur around the time of discovery or disclosure, or what we call D-Day. So D-Day can often lead to symptoms that are very similar to PTSD. But there's a second type of trauma that we need to understand if we're going to have a better functional knowledge of deceptive sexuality trauma. And that is what's called CPTSD, or complex PTSD. This is where it's stemming not from a single event, but it's coming from a pattern of harm. It's coming from repetition of trauma that exists over a period of time in the context of a perceived lack of power for the victim. Often there is not an easy escape route for the victim. So we're talking about complex PTSD, where there are patterns of behavior over time that result in extreme harm to the victim. Coupled with this sense of powerlessness to escape, these experiences shape a person's psyche, similar to drops of water that land on a rock and over time begin to reshape that rock. Those drops of water are those patterns of behavior and those repetitions of abuses that over time begin to reshape the victim's very psyche. And so when we look at this, what we're talking about is damaging effects to the victim, such as their emotional function, their thoughts, especially their self-perception, self-identity, and self-esteem. Damage to all their relationships and all their attachments. There is certainly an alteration to their perception of their partner, and now they begin to see them as their abuser when they thought that they were their protector. But it also affects how the victim relates to all of humanity, all relationships, all human beings, all men. It affects how they see their own life and their own reality. And now the world and everything in it is an unsafe place. Their survival instincts kick in. Their amygdala hijacks their brain, and they are seemingly constantly in survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze response. And their ability to depend upon their own intuition, which in the past they've always been able to trust, has now been sabotaged. So they've lost their connection and their faith in their gut instincts in what's called the second brain, which is part of the enteric system. So when you combine PTSD with complex PTSD, you begin to see a better idea of what the betrayal trauma victim begins to experience and go through. Now, when you look at Dr. Minwalla's model, he has 22 different types of trauma, of abuse and harm that he has identified in his work with victims of betrayal trauma. And he has organized those 22 types of trauma into 3 categories. And the analogy that he uses is that of a trauma center or a hospital wing that has 3 levels or 3 floors to it, because he has 3 categories for these 22 types of trauma. The first category he calls the covert phase. The second he calls the exposure phase. And the third he calls the symptom progression phase. And so the victim goes through three different phases of deceptive sexuality trauma. The first phase, the covert phase, this is referring to the period of time during which the secret sexual basement is in existence and no one knows about it. It still remains undiscovered. So this is a phase of covert or secretive domination and control and abuse that's going on that the victim is not even fully aware of. It's eroding the relational integrity between the partners and the relational health of the coupleship. And during this first phase, this covert phase, the complex trauma, the complex shaping, the drops of water on a rock have already begun, even though the victim is not aware of the secret sexual basement yet. And that complex trauma shaping is beginning to have its effect on reshaping the victim. There are three different types of trauma that Dr. Minwalla talks about during this covert phase before D-Day, before the discovery of the secret sexual basement. The next phase he talks about is the exposure phase. And this is where the most damage is done. And there are 11 different types of trauma that he's identified that take place during this exposure phase. The exposure phase is talking about the period of time where the partner and the family members have now become aware of the basement. It's been exposed. In a very real way, the entire house has caved into the basement. There's been total devastation and destruction. And it's during this phase that a lot of the partners and the family members begin to experience trauma that's more related to PTSD or acute. It's related to a singular event. And so there's 11 different types of trauma that Dr. Minwalla identifies in this exposure phase. The third level of this trauma ward, the third phase of trauma for deceptive sexuality trauma, is called symptom progression. And this is where there is more patterns of abusive behavior. Some time has passed between D-Day, but there are 8 more different types of trauma or different types of abuse that potentially unnecessarily go on from the perpetrator to the victim. And this is where complex trauma shaping continues. So you've got 3 phases: covert, exposure, and symptom progression. The first phase is more similar to complex PTSD. The second phase is where a lot of the symptoms similar to PTSD take place. And then you return in phase 3, symptom progression, where the symptoms progress, they get worse, and you have complex PTSD symptoms occurring during this phase. Now, we're not going to go through the 22 rooms. Instead, we want to refer you to Dr. Minwalla's white paper where he describes in great detail what the 22 different types of trauma are. Now, when you sit down and you read this, whether you are the perpetrator or you're the victim, we don't encourage you to read it in one sitting. It is quite a lot to handle. It's pretty overwhelming. It's better to read a few rooms at a time, a few of the types of trauma at a time, and then take a break and process and digest. And you especially want to practice self-care. Men, you want to make sure you don't go into shame as you read this. This is not going to be a helpful emotion for you. This is not going to help you be present and a safe container for your partner. And for the betrayed partners, as you read this can be very triggering. This can be very flooding and overwhelming. This can lead to despair and hopelessness and how will I ever heal from this? And it's going to be really important that you also practice self-care and that you keep a close pulse on your dashboard and how you're doing and respect your limits and take a break and walk away from the paper in order to take care of yourself. When you go through the 22 rooms, the 22 different types of trauma, just a couple of recommendations and points that we want to make. First of all, please understand that not all of the impacts and the injuries and the symptoms that are detailed in the 22 rooms will occur for every partner. Rather, this is a synthesis of a lot of voices and a lot of experiences of many betrayed partners from Dr. Minwalla's research. Another important point to remember is don't compare yourself to others. Everyone's different. No two victims are exactly alike. There's different levels of psychological resilience. There's different levels of pre-existing trauma before you found out about the deceptive sexuality. There's different durations of deception. There's different lengths of time that the relationship, that the partners have been together. Things can be confounded by other health issues, pre-existing health issues that the victim is going through. Things are impacted by the extent of the abuse and the possible continuation of the abuse well past D-Day. There's even the possibility of physical abuse and how that can affect the healing of the partner. And so it's not helpful to compare how you're doing in your trauma recovery with how others are doing. It's not necessarily comparing apples to apples. For the men, when it comes to looking at these trauma rooms and understanding the full depth of the devastation and the damage that we've done to our partners, this type of work has been called mountain work. And that is an analogy that refers to the military. And in no way, when I call this mountain work, am I making any kind of political statement or anti-military statement or anything like that. If that's how you take this, that's not how it's intended at all. I fully support our military and all of our armed forces and those that have fought to protect our freedom and our rights today. But it's simply an analogy to help us understand the type of work that we're doing here. Mountain work is the metaphor of a soldier who has been trained and conditioned to bomb villages. And so he just finished bombing a village, and his orders are to move on to the next village and to continue the attack. But when he stops and he looks down at the village that he's just destroyed, and he actually sees the carnage and the victims and the bloodshed and the destruction, instead of being ready to bomb it again or to move on to the next village, he begins to go through this reconciliation process between himself and the reality of the impact of what he has just done. And will he continue to do this? Is he going to go against his conditioning and reach out and help the victims from his attack, or is he going to continue with the attack? This is what we mean by mountain work, that we look at the victim of what we've done and we pause and we reflect and we digest and we process just the level of impact. And now we have to go through this reconciliation process of what have I done? How could it have come to this? And am I willing to be a source of healing for the person that I have caused so much damage for? What I like about the Minwalla model is that when it comes to trauma, it helps trauma victims if they're able to structure what's been done to them in some type of order. It makes it easier to process and easier to heal. It organizes the chaos of what they're experiencing, and it categorizes the destruction into 22 different compartments or different rooms or different types of trauma. Men, as you go through the 22 rooms, as you read Dr. Minwalla's paper, it's important that you don't allow yourself to go into fix-it mode. You don't have a cape. You can't fix this. You're not a superhero, and that's not the purpose of the paper. Keep it all about the victim, not about you. Don't focus on how can I make it better. Focus on fully understanding the damage that's been done. What is the reality of the victim? Practice empathy as you digest this paper. In a very real way, if you were visiting someone that you loved and cared for in ICU, what kind of energy would you want to bring in to that room? How would you want to show up for that victim? That's the kind of energy you want to have as you process this paper and as you reflect on what you've done to your partner. In a very real way, this is a sacred process. There's something holy and reverent about this. And we need to respect and honor the victim and the damage that we've done to them. Now, as you go through the paper and as you look at it, there is a quote that I want to offer from Dr. Minwalla himself. I don't want to paraphrase this. I want to quote it verbatim because it's an important reminder of one of the common things that we perpetrators often do when we're trying to process the damage that we've done. There can be a specific type of abuse that we do in response to our partners that is especially damaging and needs to be avoided. And so Dr. Minwalla speaks to it when he says, quote, Victims who are experiencing post-traumatic reactivity and stress symptoms caused by the abuse may have reactions that are aggressive, violent, distorted, endangering, confusing, scary, or otherwise harmful to others and to their relationships. The victim may experience rage, primal screams, loss of impulse control, extreme fear and extreme hypervigilance, what's called a startle response, high reactivity to triggers, and surges of fear and anxiety that are all associated with re-experiencing the trauma. These are common responses. And these common responses and behaviors may be easily misunderstood and misapplied in ways that end up blaming the victim. So it is critical to shine a light on one of the most common tactics that are used by abusive partners. This is when we deflect or defend against our responsibility for the abuse and what we've done by pathologizing the victim and their reaction and their actions. Even though the symptoms that the victim is experiencing are normal and they are a direct result of the abuse and the trauma, it is unjust, it is unfair, it is manipulative, it is another insidious form of abuse to take advantage of the victim's normal human reaction to the trauma without acknowledging that we caused the trauma, that we caused the reaction, end quote. I'd like to end with just a word of encouragement for next steps after you have read through the paper and you process it. What should the victim do and what should the abuser do? Let's begin with the victim. First of all, for both the victim and the abuser, as you read through the paper, we recommend that you read it in stages, and when you completely finish it, we recommend that you process it without discussing it with your partner for at least 24 hours, just to reduce the reactivity and really reflect on what you've read. For the victim, one of the things that the literature shows that is incredibly critical and helpful and effective is to join some type of group that has other similar victims in it. There is going to be this impulse, this reaction to isolate, to withdraw, to be convinced that no one can understand what I'm going through, no one can relate, and I'm all alone in this. But the fact is, there are others who can relate. There are others who have been abused and traumatized in very similar ways. And when you form a community with other similar victims, there is a level of support, a level of healing, a level of empathy and understanding that you simply cannot find in any other modality. Nothing is quite as effective as that sisterhood, that community of survivors, supporting each other, sharing with each other, listening to each other, validating each other, and helping each other heal. So we encourage you to find some type of support network like that that has other trauma victims similar to your trauma. If you reach out on our website and click on joy-recovery.com and go to our link for groups, we actually have a Sunday night group that is filled of couples, just like Jacqueline and I, just like you, who have been through what you've been through in a very similar way. And from that Sunday night couples meeting, there has been several groups that have spawned from that, one of which is a private group for betrayed partners, and they meet on Tuesday nights. If you're interested in learning more about that, please reach out to us. Another thing that we encourage as a next step for the victim is that you need, for your own safety, to establish some boundaries. You don't have power over the abuser's behavior. You don't have power over the abuser's choices. You don't have power over the abuser's thoughts. However, you do have power over how you respond to those situations, those behaviors, and those events in your life. You aren't being held by your abuser or your situation. You do have options. You do have more power than you realize. And when you put up boundaries, this is not about you making threats. It's not about manipulating the abuser. It's not about punishment. It's not about giving ultimatums. It's about boundaries that you need because you're reaching your limit and you know what you need to do to take the best care of yourself during this time of trauma recovery. Men, what we need to do is we need to allow the victim to be in control. We need to honor the boundaries that they need to set for their own safety and for their own healing. We need to allow the victim to be in the driver's seat. They feel like their life is out of control. They feel like everything has been destroyed. Their own reality is no longer there. And out of this chaos and this seeming lack of control, we need to voluntarily, willfully, as a step of living amends, as a step of truly wanting our partners to heal, we need to voluntarily give up for a season our rights, our privileges, our preferences, everything, and transfer all control to the victim. Why? Because during our secret sexual basement, we were holding all the cards. They were playing a game that they did not even realize they were playing. We changed the whole rules on the relationship. There was this incredible hypocrisy and double standard going on, where we were doing things that we would never allow them to do. We were in control. We were in control of their reality. We were in control of their perception. We were in control of the flow of information and what they were privy to and not privy to. We had secret email accounts, secret phones, secret credit cards, secret relationships, secret passwords, secret websites, secret apps. We were in control. And we protected our secrets. We didn't protect our partner. That needs to be inverted now. We need to protect the victim at all costs and do no more harm. So we need to give them control and empower them to have the boundaries that they need to have in order to feel safe, to respect their own limits, and to provide what they need for their healing. We also offer coaching services for both the abuser and the victim, and you can reach out to us and find out more information on that. What should the abuser do? Well, besides transferring control to the victim and respecting and honoring their boundaries, we need to continue to do mountain work. We need to join with other men who want to stop the abuse, who have a shared goal of stopping the harm, who understand the necessity of doing mountain work and looking down at the village and understanding exactly the extent of what we've done and how can we enter into the village and help the victims and repair and provide restitution for everything that we've destroyed. Another thing that you're going to experience as you go through this process of fully understanding the extent, the 22 potential forms of trauma that you've caused for your partner, the natural emotion that you're going to feel from this is an emotion of deep sorrow. And that is to be expected. That is a normal response. But from that sorrow will either stem shame or guilt. Shame is not going to help you. Guilt can be very helpful. Shame does not come from a higher power, but guilt does. Shame tells you that you are a bad person. Guilt tells you that you did something bad. Shame will lead to despair and giving up. Guilt will lead to action and motivation. Shame will cause you to isolate, to withdraw, to avoid, and focus on yourself. And self-focus was the reason that we got in trouble in the first place. Guilt will motivate you to focus on the victim, to take action, and to not focus on yourself. From the sorrow that you feel from looking at the trauma that you've caused, you have a choice to either focus on self or the victim. Focus on self leads to shame and actually does more damage, leads to more abuse, and is not helpful, it's harmful for the victim. Whereas guilt is used by our higher power to lead to motivation, to lead to action, to lead to learning, to lead to growth, to lead to development, to lead to becoming a better human, so that we make sure we never repeat this damage again. In the midst of your sorrow that you're going to experience as you digest this material, it is absolutely essential that you avoid going into shame and instead embrace the guilt and leverage the guilt to take action. Use it as motivation to truly put the victim first and to protect the victim at all costs. We do have a group, a brotherhood of men, a subversive group of men who reject the man box. They reject the collective socialization of men and embrace the mountain work together and put the betrayed partner first. And we hold each other accountable to grow in empathy and to stop the IAD behaviors and to be the man that our partners thought they had. If you'd like more information on this subversive brotherhood, then reach out to us on our website and we'll direct you in the right way. I hope that you've enjoyed this overview of the Minwalla model for part 1 and part 2. And we encourage you to go check out the model, read the 10 steps of how the secret basement was erected in the first place, read about the 22 trauma rooms that are potentially being experienced by the victim, and then do the mountain work necessary to learn from this, grow from this, be better, and help your partners heal. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.